Good morning and welcome to Inquirer Live, the Will Bunch conversation. I'm Erica Palan and I'm the Deputy Opinion Editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm thrilled that you've joined us today for a conversation with my friend and colleague, Will Bunch. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most important issues in the upcoming election, conspiracy theories. If you've been paying attention for the last few weeks or the last 4 years, you know that there's going to be plenty for us to unpack over the next hour. So here's how our event will work. For the first 10 to 15 minutes, Will is going to talk about what he thinks about conspiracy theories, including the ones circulated by QAnon. During that time, you can submit questions using the comment feature on Inquirer.com. I want to say a special hello to our viewers who are watching this live stream through Facebook and Twitter. We're so glad you've joined us today. If you want to submit a question, we'll need you to click through to Inquirer.com and leave your question in the comments section so that our producers can flag it to me and I can ask it to Will later in this program. Once Will has finished his talk, I'll come back with a few questions of my own. I'm his editor, I can't resist. And then I'll turn it over to questions from you, the viewers. Anyone who has ever read Will Bunch or followed him on Twitter knows that he is a journalist who is full of opinions and he's not shy about sharing them. I am really looking forward to all of you asking him some interesting things today. Will has been covering presidential races since 1984. He has won numerous journalism awards, sharing the 1992 Pulitzer for spot news reporting with the staff of New York Newsday. He's been the Inquirer's national opinion columnist since 2017. But prior to that, he was a writer and editor for the Philadelphia Daily News, where he was the author of a popular blog called Attitude, where he wrote about anything and everything with an opinion. And now it is my pleasure to turn it over to Will Bunch.
Hey, Erica, thanks. That was a great high energy introduction. And I'm so glad you're here doing this, and the people who read my column and read my newsletter are getting to meet you because you've been such an integral part of making this happen 3 times a week. I honestly couldn't do it without you. So it's good to be here with you, and it's good to be here with all the guests. I can't wait till 2021 when we do one of these and we're all going to be in the same room, and it's going to be fantastic. But now we're all in the same virtual room, and that's nice. And I'm glad you're all here. So how this is going to work is I'm going to give a not super long spiel, about 10 or 15 minutes, about conspiracy theories, but mainly kind of my perspective from, as Erica said, having covered 10 of these presidential races, going all the way back to Jesse Jackson and Alan Cranston and people back in 1984. And just some thoughts on what it all means, why things like conspiracy theories influence voters so much more than things like healthcare or the economy. I'm so glad that my very first Inquirer Live event is about a presidential election that's happening in less than a month, because when I was a kid, basically, this is the reason I went into journalism, was I was obsessed with presidential elections. I always wanted to cover them, and it's been just as great as I thought. I was raised on a book that came out when I was 14 years old called The Boys on the Bus, about what it was like to cover presidential campaigns. And the funny thing is, when you go back and look at it, it sounds like it's terrible, right? You're on the road, you're eating sandwiches out of plastic bags, and you're can't do your laundry. And somehow I read this book and decided this was what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, right? So, and so I went to college. I worked every day on our daily school newspaper, and I also majored in political science, and I learned a lot from some great professors about how elections work and the kind of things that influenced elections. And one thing I learned, and this was back in the late 70s, early 80s, was that nothing influenced elections more than the economy. I was in college when Ronald Reagan was elected president in 1980 on the slogan, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" And I was still a fairly young journalist covering presidential politics in 1992 when Bill Clinton's motto was, "It's the economy, stupid." And the thing is, the political science backs this up, right? 19 times since 1900, a president like Donald Trump has run for re-election. and only 4 times has the incumbent president lost, and each time it was because the economy was in some kind of recession. And there are political scientists who made a career out of models looking at what the economic numbers are, whether we're entangled in a foreign war, and what the odds are of getting reelected. The thing is, that model's totally broken. What I've learned in the last decade is nothing I learned in political science in college makes any sense anymore, because when you talk to voters, they're really not making decisions on who's best for their pocketbook so much, or issues like who's going to give them health care. In fact, think about how the 2016 election went down. In that election, you had low-income, white working-class voters went overwhelmingly for a Republican who vowed that he was going to take away their health care coverage. But the flip side of that is the vast majority of wealthy folks from places like Silicon Valley or from Manhattan voted for a Democrat who said she was going to raise their taxes. So why do people vote against their economic interests? Why don't they care? And I think the main reason is over the last half century or so, we've really become two political tribes, where we're attached cultural, whether we're a liberal or a conservative, we have these cultural attachments, and attachments that really go beyond the issues and ideology. Again, I was just so struck by this when Trump was elected in 2016, because like many of you who are watching this, when that happened, I was like, I woke up on November 9th and my first instinct was, oh my gosh, how did this happen, right? So in addition to my own reporting during that election, which I did a lot of, I also read countless other pieces, from the heartland about why Trump won, and there was so much conventional wisdom that Trump's victory had to do with something called economic anxiety, because all these jobs, manufacturing and industrial jobs, had disappeared, that they turned to a demagogue like Trump. But the thing is, every interview I read with actual voters, almost nobody ever talked about these issues. They talked about things about how Hillary Clinton was responsible for the 4 dead people in Benghazi, or they only wanted to talk about Hillary's emails, which 5 years later, I'm still trying to understand what that issue is even all about. Or there was just a lot of rank misogyny in that election, which was played out at Trump's rallies when they chanted "Lock her up" about the woman who would have been the first woman president. When I went to Trump rallies, I asked people what brought them out there, and the number one answer I got time and time again had nothing to do with conventional politics. It was people's hatred of the media and their hatred of CNN, for example. I mean, that was all people wanted to talk to me about at Trump rallies that I attended, was how terrible CNN is. And so going into 2020, I was wondering how these trends were going to play out. And as we're seeing, 2020 is actually in some ways shaping up as being even crazier than 2016 in what's motivating voters. And the one thing that I've written about a lot in the last 2 years, because just like the Trump phenomenon in 2016, it's so bizarre that I'm trying to get, at least in my world, that I'm trying to get my arms wrapped around it, is this conspiracy theory that's extremely popular, especially on Facebook and maybe some other social media, that's called QAnon. It's a bizarre theory, and it's with a bizarre name. I want to, in the next couple minutes, I just want to do 2 things. One, I'm going to try and explain what QAnon actually is, the best I can, which is hard to do. The other thing is I'm going to just read you a couple of quotes from people who believe in QAnon to try and get a sense of so we can talk about maybe what's motivating these people. First of all, what is QAnon? Pardon my glasses. I'm going to read a little bit because, like I said, it's so crazy. It's basically kind of this vast, sprawling, open-ended internet conspiracy theory. The kind of at the core of it is this idea that the world is run by a cabal of Satan-worshiping pedophiles, and they're on one side and Donald Trump is on the other side of the issue. And Trump is kind of almost a divine force that was sent here to break up this global sex trafficking ring, which, as you might imagine, is heavily centered on people that conservatives tend to hate. So we're talking about prominent Democrats, we're talking about Hollywood celebrities and other people like that. Some of the people that QAnon believers allege are part of this whole ring, Hillary Clinton, of course, some of the people in her inner circle, Barack Obama, George Soros always seems to be the demon for everything. The Hollywood celebrities, and again, there's no evidence against any of these people. I'm almost embarrassed to mention their names, but people like Oprah Winfrey, Tom Hanks, Ellen DeGeneres, people have even accused, Pope Francis, the Dalai Lama. And the thing is, if child molestation wasn't bad enough, people in QAnon even believe that people from this group kill their victims, eat them somehow, that they want to extract some kind of life-extending chemical from the blood of their victims. I mean, that's how, for some people, that's how extreme this QAnon theory is. They believe that there's a deep state within the U.S. government that supports this, and that Donald Trump was sent here to break this up. This all started in October 17th. There was a popular conspiracy board on the so-called dark web that most of us never go to, but a lot of people do apparently. It was called 4chan. It's been replaced by other sites. It's very complicated, but basically a guy showed up on 4chan claiming to be Q, who was actually an anonymous person who actually was supposed to be a government intelligence officer. And he was the one who said Trump was here to take on this child molesting cabal. And as Q's messages on 4chan grew more popular, people started reposting them or their own interpretations of it on Facebook, which is a much more popular site. So you can see what grew there. Also Twitter. Many people have done YouTube videos about QAnon. There have been hundreds of Facebook groups dedicated to some aspect of QAnon by this point. They share posts from Q that are called Q drops. They also think of it as like Harry Potter or something else. There's fan fiction. People come up with their own adaptations of the theory. People call it a big tent conspiracy theory because it's so big that people can kind of interpret it any way they want. It really, to some, it takes on almost the aura of a religion, if that makes sense. One thing I just wanted, a couple weird offshoots of it. It's got that QAnon's kind of got a cousin that was called Pizzagate, which again was a theory that there was a child sex ring operating out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. By a friend of David Brock's, owned by a friend of David Brock's, who's a friend and ally of Hillary Clinton's. This theory was so widespread that in 2017 or 2018, I believe, a believer in it showed up at the pizzeria with a gun. He was going to try and find the basement. The irony is that the basement of this pizzeria where the sex ring was supposed to be happening, the pizzeria actually doesn't have a basement. So, but that just kind of gives you the tenor of this whole thing. There's other offshoots, like people believe that John F. Kennedy Jr. didn't really die in a plane crash in 1999, that he's still alive, and either he might be Q or he's helping Q. And so when you hear these things, your reaction is probably similar to my reaction, which is, who would possibly believe in something like this, right? But they do. I'm going to quote you a couple people from some really good reporting that's been done on QAnon. My first thing is from a piece that Charlotte Alter, who's a great journalist in her own right. She's also the daughter of Jonathan Alter. You probably see a lot on cable TV. She went to the key swing state of Wisconsin and a place called Ozaukee County, which I've never heard of. Here's what two women who own a small business named Tina Arthur and Marcella Frank told her that they're planning to vote for Trump, and their main reason is because they're so alarmed by, quote, the cabal. They told Charlotte Alter they've heard, quote, numerous reports that the COVID-19 tents that were set up in New York and California were actually for children who've been rescued from underground sex trafficking tunnels. They also, and I've read this a lot in the literature, they actually kind of say, well, we're not really followers of QAnon, but then they spout the QAnon philosophy. So one of them, this Marcella Frank, said she spends most of her free time researching child sex trafficking. And while the other woman added that she often finds information on the Russian-owned search engine Yandex. So again, there's a Russia aspect to this, of course. He said, Frank's eyes fill with tears as she describes what she's found. Children who are being raped and tortured so the cabal can, quote, extract their blood and drink it. She said Trump has seized the blood on the black market as part of his fight against the cabal. I think if Biden wins, the world is over, basically, Arthur, the other woman, added. I would honestly try and read the country. And if that wasn't an option, I would probably take my children and sit in the garage and turn my car on, and it would be over. I mean, that's just sad, and it's just tragic. And yet there are, you know, thousands of hundreds of thousands of people out there who believe in QAnon. We've seen them at the Trump rallies. Just quickly, another woman, her 62-year-old mother, this is almost kind of funny, became attracted to QAnon. Apparently, she lives in New Hampshire. She was on YouTube one day because she was looking for a how-to video. She said she can't remember for what exactly, maybe a tutorial on how to get her car windows sparkling clean. And the algorithm on YouTube instead served up a QAnon video. It said she remembered a feeling of magnetic attraction. Quote, like, wow, what is this? She recalled as I spoke with her by phone. For me, it was revealing some things that maybe I was hoping would come to pass. She sensed that Q knew her anxieties as if someone was taking her train of thought and actually verbalizing it. So a couple of things we see with these QAnon followers. One is extreme distrust of the mainstream media. This woman who lives in New Hampshire said she gets her information from Fox News, Twitter, and the New Hampshire Union Leader, which is a very conservative newspaper. You know, obviously they're getting a lot of their information though from Facebook and just from social media. That they're totally bypassing the mainstream media altogether. The other thing which is striking to me, and when you listen to these stories, is again how it's kind of taking on a religious quality, as if it's like kind of filling the void. Is you know, organized religion has declined so much in this country in the last 20 years, and as people move away from traditional religion, it seems like they're finding things like internet conspiracy theories to replace that. You know, and this didn't happen overnight. I mean, obviously, we've seen over the last really 40 years in American life, we've seen kind of I guess I would call it an actual cabal as opposed to the fake cabal, but an actual cabal of billionaires like the Koch brothers, Rupert Murdoch, and Fox News, you know, trying to forge a Republican Party that will kind of keep their philosophy of minimal government alive, and so they've sown this deep distrust in the mainstream media. When they started, they didn't really know that the internet was going to come along, but it did, and it's almost like they've lost control of, you know, it. I mean, it was one thing 20 years ago for Rush Limbaugh or Glenn Beck or people like that to have such influence among kind of the masses of people, but now even I think Fox News has lost control to some extent, and instead internet conspiracy theorizing has become a home for so many people. I actually I did a book about 10 years ago, actually just came out 10 years ago this fall, about the rise of the Tea Party, which really kind of, if you follow these things, the Tea Party kind of set the stage for QAnon. You know, and one thing I really learned when I researched that book is people, you know, maybe because of our fear of mortality, which is something we don't like to talk about, but I mean, people like to see themselves as part of something bigger than themselves, as part of some great, vast movement, you know, and these internet conspiracy theories give them a chance to feel like they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. And when you go to these places like the Rust Belt, I mean, they're concerned that the traditional culture of America, I won't go off on a tangent about, white supremacy or male supremacy or whatever, but there are fears about that going away. Certainly, I mean, there is legitimate economic anxiety, right, about so many jobs that have been shipped overseas, so many factories have been closed, and these things, and people are looking for something to root their lives in, and we would hope it would be something positive and forward-driven and rational, but instead it's this crazy conspiracy theory for many of them, for QAnon. What's the answer? So what's the answer to this? I mean, I have a couple thoughts about this. I mean, one, and this is nothing new, and we're seeing this play out to some degree, is obviously these big social media companies like Facebook, like Twitter, like YouTube, which is owned by Google, can do what they can to kind of control the flow of information. And we're seeing that most dramatically, I think, between the time we announced this program and today. Facebook has come out and announced the QAnon groups are going to be banned on its site. So that's something. The other thing I think is just a bigger investment in education. People have turned away from science, they've turned away from reason, and I think there's a long story to be told. And just a little spoiler alert: I actually signed a contract to write a book this summer that's coming out in 2022 about higher education and college and how it's become the big driver of America's political divide. And I think if we can solve that problem, where people have meaningful educational opportunities that suit their needs, not a one size fits all, but whether people have access to training, better community colleges, free public universities, internships, a system that people can all feel that they can be a part of. In fact, one idea I floated in my newsletter a few months ago is maybe it's time to take seriously something like mandatory national service, where people take a gap year when they're 18 years old, whether you're from Harvard or whether from your support community in West Virginia, people work together on civic projects. You won't have this sorting of people into their different tribes. Instead, people will be making connections. They'll be seeing how other people live, and maybe it'll help give us a better sense of common purpose, because I think we need that. And but it's a long-term project. You're not going to solve the problem of QAnon overnight. If Joe Biden does win, he's ahead in the polls right now. Who knows what's going to happen between now and mid-November? But if Joe Biden becomes the next president, QAnon's not going to go away. It could become the basis for resistance to Joe Biden. So those are my thoughts on how this happened and what to do about it. And now I'm ready to take questions from Erica and then questions from some of you guys.
Hey, Will, that was awesome. That was great. Thank you so much for all the time you put into that. So I'm going to kick this off with a couple questions from myself. One of the things that I've always loved about editing you is that you're really a student of political history. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about if you've ever seen a movement like QAnon spread so quickly before, or is this something that just doesn't exist without the advent of the internet and social media?
It's kind of yes and no. I mean, there's a long history in this country of conspiracy theory. One of the most famous political pieces ever written was by the late historian James Hofstadter, who in 1964, and the context was this was during the rise of Barry Goldwater and kind of the original right-wing republicanism of the early 1960s, wrote a piece called "The Paranoid Style in American Politics," and and he talked about the Freemasons, for example. I grew up in the 60s and 70s, really in a time of conspiracy theory over whether JFK's assassination was a conspiracy. Unlike QAnon, I'm still not totally unconvinced that one isn't true, right? So we've always had conspiracy theories, but absolutely. I mean the internet. Even JFK conspiracy theories, you had to find a publisher to publish your book, right? I mean, there were gatekeepers, and right now there, of course, I'm stating the obvious, but there's no gatekeepers, and so people can find themselves. It's not just that the New York Times and Walter Cronkite aren't there anymore to control the conversation, but even Rupert Murdoch and Fox News and Rush Limbaugh have kind of lost control of the conversation at this point, and I think we're seeing it get kind of nuttier and nuttier, and it's concerning because as it gets nuttier, the danger also increases. Because one thing I didn't fear, I talk about a lot, is the fear that if things don't go well for the QAnon world, which they probably won't, how many of these people are going to embrace violence as a solution? And that's the big fear.
Yeah. So I'm interested that you mentioned that there's no longer traditional gatekeepers. And I'm thinking a little bit about how we square all of these rampant conspiracy theories with free speech. I mean, I know you and I as journalists, I know where we stand on the First Amendment and how strongly we feel about it. And, we've lauded the internet as a marketplace of ideas over the last 25 years. It's a place where everyone can find a voice. But as we've seen it grow into conspiracy theories like QAnon, I'm wondering, how do you square our love of free speech with what's happening online right now?
It's hard. I mean, and this is the one area where is somebody who's, as my readers know, I'm fairly to very progressive on most issues. And when people ask me, well, where are the places where you disagree with the progressive movement and free speech issues is the one place where I find myself. I kind of was raised as an absolutist in free speech. So yeah, I am somewhat concerned about calls for the government to regulate speech on places like Facebook. I mean, I think that's going to be one of the big challenges of the next decade, of the 2020s, is going to be figuring out how to regulate this. I mean, the thing is, you say that, but then a lot of the things that we find that are really offensive on Twitter or Facebook, you can see that they're really calls to violence, or whether it's violence against women or violence against political people we don't like. I mean, I think the Supreme Court and everybody else has found that you can't yell fire in a crowded theater, and you're not allowed to exhort violence. So we need to walk on that tightrope, right, where people can express ideas no matter how out there their ideas are, without advocating either for violence or things that are not allowed. And part of the problem is, moderating online speech, as we know here at the Inquirer, right? It takes human beings, it takes people to do that. And we live in an economy where there's not, people don't like to pay money for people to do that, but you really need a lot of human beings to be watching these conversations. And that's something we need to figure out how to do that, because we don't have that system in place right now.
Yeah. I want to pivot a little bit. One of the things that's frankly totally freaking me out is the fact that we could wind up having some hardcore QAnon believers in Congress after this election. There's Marjorie Taylor Greene from Georgia, and closer to home, there's 2 QAnon supporting candidates on the ballot in Delaware. And if any of these candidates get elected, what's your biggest worry?
The thing is, if it's only a couple of them, I'm not super worried. I mean, I think the challenge for Congress is going to be, you can't really condemn somebody for what they believe when they arrive in Congress. You can only really judge what they do, and so for people say that the Republican caucus shouldn't accept Marjorie Taylor Greene, who apparently doesn't really have a serious challenger, so she's definitely going to be in the next Congress, right? You can't really kick her out of Congress for believing in QAnon. You can really only judge them by what they do. If it's only a couple people, I mean, unfortunately, as you know, I mean, we've always had a couple wacky people in every session of Congress. This is just taking it to a new level. So I'm not as worried about that. I think I'm more worried about the spread of conspiracy theories among the masses. Right now, I think that's the biggest challenge. Of how do we tackle that?
All right, I'm going to turn this over to a question from one of our viewers. Renee wants to know, what do you make of the conspiracy that's going around where people say that masks have become controversial and where they think that masks can actually make a person sicker? Can you talk a little bit about masks and conspiracy?
Yeah, I mean, this is another area where it's not really about the mask; it's a stand-in for something else. I mean, it's not surprising that the anti-mask movement basically, if you did a Venn diagram, it pretty much overlaps with the right-wing movement uh, in this country because for one thing, I mean, there's concerns about masculinity, which have been a huge driver of the right wing movement in this country, which is are we becoming feminized? Am I losing my masculinity in this culture, this politically correct culture? So you can see where beliefs like that and just this emphasis on personal freedom, which by the way, which has been totally incubated and funded by people like the Koch brothers who want total freedom because they're billionaires and they don't want to pay income taxes, right? And their kind of personal struggle to be free to not pay taxes and to pollute the environment has led to this, has fueled this vast libertarian movement in this country where people say the government doesn't have the power to make me do anything, including wear a mask. And and also it just shows how we've become so much less of a culture of caring, because basically the reason for wearing a mask is to care about other people. And for millions of people, caring about other people obviously is no longer not just not their primary concern, but it's not even in the ballpark, right? So so it's not really surprising that people turn against masks given the broader environment out there.
One of the things you mentioned during your talk was the great divides that exist in this country right now. And I wonder, if Joe Biden is elected to be president, what do you think he needs to do early on in his presidency to start to heal those divides?
I think he's, I was not a Biden supporter during the primaries. I came out with a column about my hope to vote for Elizabeth Warren, which didn't come off exactly. But I think since the fall campaign started this summer and this fall, I've been really impressed with the way Joe Biden's run his campaign and saying the right things. I mean, I think his speech at Gettysburg, which he just delivered this week, is going to be one that people are going to remember. When they publish those books of great political speeches, I think Biden's Gettysburg speech, where he talked about the cost of division in this country and how much unity can mean to this country, was really one of the better political speeches of this century so far. And that gives me a lot of hope. I mean, when you think about the problems America faces, I mean, Joe Biden is very well designed for them, because on one hand, he's very good as a politician at connecting with average people, and he can show empathy, which means so much to people. But his whole career, he's never been an ideologue. That he's willing to, when it comes to policies and it comes to ideas, he's willing to kind of change with the times. And so obviously, my great positive hope for the Biden years, if there are Biden years, is because our needs for things like a Green New Deal type environmental policy and like a vast expansion of healthcare, whether it's Medicare for all or something else. I think Joe Biden could be a president who could pull those things off, because I think he's willing to listen to the case for those things, and I think he's got the right kind of pitch to the American public that he can overcome some of the opposition to this.
I want to take a second right now and to just remind our viewers at home that you can submit questions for Will at Inquirer.com. Just write down in the comments section where you're live streaming this now, and they don't have to be conspiracy theory related. We're going to pivot this conversation in a few minutes to some broader conversations.
I'm seeing some good ones on my screen, so it's great. You keep them coming.
Please keep them coming. So another question from one of our readers, this from Kyle, and he says, Will, many people I know from my hometown have embraced QAnon, especially after the Epstein case and the lockdown. While I agree that the Epstein case is fishy, I hate that it leads some people to raise questions about QAnon. How do you try to get people away from QAnon?
That's a good point about Epstein, one of the things that makes QAnon so insidious is there actually is sex trafficking, and one thing, and I didn't get a chance to mention this in my talk, but one thing that's interesting that's gone on over the course of the summer is this kind of effort by QAnon to look like kind of a more mainstream anti-child sex trafficking group, where they've actually basically hijacked the older Save the Children hashtag. There is a sex trafficking problem. Often it involves family members or people. It doesn't involve Hillary Clinton, or it doesn't involve, or it doesn't involve generally leaders of the Democratic Party. But the thing is, people are people, and there are going to be people at the very top, like a Jeffrey Epstein, who are going to be child molesters, unfortunately, but they're not a cabal, and they're not a majority. So it's hard. The best way to influence people is through community. It's through conversations. It's through one of the things that makes it so difficult is, for so many of us, our communities are just our online community, Facebook and Twitter. We're not going so much to the church, to the coffee hour after church, where we're talking to our neighbors, or we're not going to the bowling league on Tuesday nights or whatever. But I think people can be brought back to reality by other people and by community, and I think the big challenge of our time is how do we bring that back, because we've let it get away.
Here's a question from Jay, who says, do you think Trump actually believes in conspiracy theories, or does he just do it to help him politically?
I think he believes in conspiracy theories. It's interesting. We've all gone back and looked at Trump's involvement in the birther conspiracy theory. The idea that Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States, that he was born in Kenya or somewhere else. And at the time when this was going on, which was like 2011 or so, it just seemed so crazy. And now we look at it as the roots of his political movement and his rise to the presidency. And so the question is out there, is Donald Trump in some way a genius because he saw this as a path to become the leader of America, or did he just get lucky? I think if you go back, I've read and studied a lot about Donald Trump. I was actually, of course, I was in New York City in the 80s and 90s on the way up, and I think that's just more how he rolls. He grew up in the world of Howard Stern and talk radio, and I think he's just always liked the outrageous. And believing in a conspiracy theory is outrageous. And you say, oh, I believe, whether it's JFK or whether it's QAnon, whatever, you're kind of pushing people's buttons when you believe in a conspiracy theory. And Donald Trump, God knows, likes to push people's buttons. So.
Well, here we have another Trump question from one of our readers named Sue. And she says that she hears you say that you go to Trump rallies. And she says, I would find it difficult to be surrounded by people who are so different from me. How do you keep your cool?
It's interesting. I had a fascinating experience when I don't know if you remember in 2016, but after Trump was elected, he liked rallies so much that he actually kept having them after the election, which was just one of the craziest things ever. So I actually went to a Trump rally in December 2016, 1 month after he was elected, in Hershey at the big hockey arena out there. And I got there early because I really wanted to talk to people. And most people were gracious and friendly, but there was this one guy who I told him I was with, at the time I was with the Daily News, and I said, I'm with the Philadelphia Daily News. He goes, all right, and he walked away, and I was talking to somebody else actually, and the guy was looking at his phone, and he rushed back 30 seconds later, and he's holding up his phone, and what he found was a famous Philadelphia Daily News front page when Trump announced his famous Muslim ban, and the headline was "The New Furor," like Führer, and it was an image of Trump with his arm kind of out like this, and needless to say, it was a very controversial headline. And this guy was holding his phone to all these people saying, this guy works for this paper, that they called Donald Trump. They compared Donald Trump to Hitler. And, it was kind of uncomfortable. But luckily, nobody else that he tried to rile up, I think, was as crazed about it as he was. And it was fine. But, I did a whole book about the Tea Party in 2010. I mean, every journalist has their kind of own style. And for whatever reason, and of course, I mean, my roots are from hillbillies. I mean, my family all before me were all Midwesterners, and from the kind of places where Donald Trump is real popular, like Missouri. So I think that helps me talk to Trump voters. But also, I mean, I always just want to, even people who I 100% disagree with, I always want to hear them say their piece, and I just want to hear them out. Like, why do you believe this? And as a journalist, unless there's some reason to, and there almost never is, I don't challenge them. I just say, tell me what you think, and I listen. And I think people respect that, no, I think some of the most memorable and important journalism I've done the last 10 years has been going to Tea Party events and then going to Trump rallies and talking to people, and it works out well.
Let's fast forward to the day, maybe not the day after the election, since I think results are going to take a few days to come in, but the day after it's announced that we have a new president, or that Trump has remained the president. We've got a bunch of questions here from folks who want to know, if Joe Biden wins, Trump has been really vocal about what would happen if he's not elected, and he might not voluntarily leave office. What do you think happens if that scenario plays out?
Well, I think you have, I mean, it may, well, first of all, a couple things. One is, Trump's had such a terrible last couple of weeks. Joe Biden has increased his lead in the polls. I think it's important to remember that any efforts by Trump to like fraudulently claim victory hinge partly on what the margin of the election is. So if it's a real landslide for Joe Biden, it's going to be very hard for Trump to really make noise about how the election was stolen from him, though he will surely somehow. If the election is closer, as many of us have long thought it would be, and obviously that could happen again. He's got a couple months to try and use the levers of government to somehow exert control over this. In William Barr, he's got an attorney general who is capable of doing anything to try and use the power of the Justice Department to intervene in the election somehow to get votes thrown out or disqualified. He also, because of gerrymandering and what happened in 2010, the Republicans control legislatures in some states which are now more anti-Trump, like Pennsylvania. Trump is leading by the polls in 12 points in Pennsylvania, but Republicans control both houses of the legislature. And there's a lot of concern that state legislatures could be a vehicle to appoint electors, regardless of what the results are, because Trump is going to claim that any votes that came in by mail after November 3rd are fraudulent and shouldn't count. And in some states like Pennsylvania, he might lose by 5-10 points, and he might lead on November 4th from the in-person ballot. So, I mean, there are groups that are playing war games, as they call them, to basically kind of map out how this goes. And again, I think it depends on the margins. But I do think, I mean, if you play these war games all the way out to the end, what if Trump refuses to leave office? I mean, for one thing, I mean, he's alienated most of the military, right? So, if you look at any banana republic, I mean, it's kind of, if you really want to play the coup game all the way to the end, you kind of have to have the military in your back pocket. And, I mean, if it just got to that unprecedented level of chaos, something that we've never seen in 240 years of American history, you're not going to see tanks rolling through the streets, or if you do, you're going to see tanks rolling through the streets to get, surround Trump and get him to leave the White House. I mean, to me, that's the nightmare scenario. I mean, it's still still ends with Joe Biden becoming president, but at the cost of national trauma, that's just going to be hard to bear.
So listening to you talk, this all ties together, right? If Joe Biden wins the election and Trump loses, and QAnon supporters who are strong believers that Donald Trump is the best person to lead our country, I can imagine that those conspiracy theories about election fraud really just ramp up and cause just even more divide and even more discontent across the country. And I wonder, what do you think the responsibility of the media is in covering this in a way that doesn't create more division?
Well, I've written about this, particularly, there's different levels of this. I mean, one level I'm very concerned about is just how the media is going to handle the election returns, because we saw in the last time there was a disputed presidential election in 2000, when and how the TV networks called Florida, other key states, but especially Florida, for George W. Bush or for Al Gore, that played an impact, and when the states declared Florida for George W. Bush at 2 a.m. on election night, that kind of created this image that it was hard for Gore to overcome for the next month, and he never did, and he never was able to get over that image that he was trying to dislodge George W. Bush, and so I'm very worried about a similar scenario in 2020 where networks, being just the way their mindset is and being competitive, that they're going to call states too early, or they're going to succumb to pressure to call states too early. I mean, what I called for, and which hasn't happened, and I'm pretty sure is not going to happen, but I would love to see the major TV networks and other major news organizations like the New York Times, or I would like to see them talking to each other. I'd like to see them have a summit meeting where they all get in the same room and say, let's have an agreement now on how we're going to call a winner in this race, because I think that would be so important, and I think they also have a responsibility just to be really clear in their reporting. In that scenario that I talked about earlier, where it's election night and the machine returns from Pennsylvania are showing Trump ahead, even though we know that he's probably going to get swamped in the mail ballots. It's really incumbent on the media to explain that, because I see that all the time where they don't do a good job explaining that, where they kind of go with the old instincts. They'll be like, well, Trump is ahead, and it's like, I don't know how they're going to report it, but they're going to have to say, look, these are the machine returns. Maybe Trump's doing better than we thought he would, or maybe Biden's doing better than we thought. But the important thing about these machine returns is these are only a very small part of the picture, and so are they going to be capable of doing that though, and showing some restraint? I mean, if history's any guide, I'm concerned. I'm very concerned about the media.
I'm seeing a ton of comments here with people who are concerned about election integrity. And this reminds me of something that we talk about on our team, the opinion team at the Inquirer, all the time, which is making your voting plan. What's your plan for voting?
I kind of go back and forth, because I do think, my basic plan is, so I live in Delaware County, and they've been very good about getting mail-in ballots to people. I'm on their list from the primary. So I actually just got an email from Delaware County about 3 days ago saying that they're sending me a mail-in ballot. It hasn't arrived yet. And right now I'm leaning towards getting that mail-in ballot and taking it either to the county election board in media, or I'm not exactly sure what kind of Dropbox infrastructure they're going to be able to set up, or take it to a Dropbox, because as I've written several times, I'm just very concerned about dropping it in the U.S. Postal Service, given all the problems they've had. So I would do that. The thought has occurred to me, and it gets kind of complicated, because once you get a mail-in ballot, there's some issue about when you actually go in to vote in person, whether you have to then fill out a provisional ballot, which is actually what I had to do in the primary, because I did go in to vote in person, and I was told to fill in a provisional ballot. But I do think I do think there's something to be said for voting in person because of what we were just talking about. Because your vote, if you vote in person, your vote is going to be registered on election night. And if you want, if you're worried about what it means that Trump is going to have this big fake lead on election night because of machine returns, and you want to vote for Joe Biden, then maybe you should consider voting by machine. I mean, in terms of, I don't want to, and I've gotten into it with a couple of readers over this. I don't want to sound like I'm blasé about the coronavirus and health concerns, because I'm not at all. In fact, that's why I'm leaning towards going to a Dropbox. But on the other hand, and I went to vote in person in the primaries in June, and what I witnessed firsthand is that voting in person is probably safer than going to the supermarket. And almost all of us go to the supermarket. So if you're in a medical position where you're not even going to the supermarket and having your groceries delivered and not contacting anybody, then yes, absolutely, you should vote by mail. But I think if you go to the supermarket, then you can go to a polling place. The thing is, you might have to deal with other problems like lines and whatnot. And then you also mentioned election integrity. We don't know how it's going to play out with these poll watchers or ballot security people that Trump has trained. What kind of hassles they're going to cause for people at polling places. That's probably more of a factor in the city like Philadelphia than it would be in the suburbs. But so that's my plan, and those are just some of the things I'm worried about and thinking about.
So this will probably be our last question because we're getting close to 1 hour, but I feel like I can't let you off of this conversation without touching on the controversy over the presidential debates. Of course, the one last week, unbelievably, it was only last week. It feels like a year ago.
Right.
Of course, it was quite fiery. And yesterday, news broke that the debates would be virtual, and then President Trump said he would not participate in that. And I'm wondering, do you think we still need to have a second and third debate at this point?
I'd be kind of thrilled if they didn't have them. I mean, I don't think the first debate really shed much light at all on how either Donald Trump or Joe Biden would govern the country. In fact, I'm mildly disappointed in Biden that he didn't articulate more of a vision for governing. And I don't think Kamala Harris did much better this week, to be honest. But I mean, I would like to see more of that. I mean, I think they're kind of playing it safe because they're in the lead, right? So they don't want to spark any new controversies. But and then Trump's behavior in the first debate was just atrocious. So so I'd be thrilled if they can't work it out and they don't have the debates. I really don't think that they're necessary or really adding anything at this point. I mean, on the other hand, the candidates have to decide what works for them politically. If Trump is going to show up at an event that's been approved and sanctioned by the debate commission, then Biden should absolutely show up. I don't think he should cede the playing field. I mean, it's interesting. I saw this week that when Trump said he wouldn't go to the town hall style debate next week, Biden told reporters, "I'll be there," but then an hour later they announced that no, they're going to have a town hall on ABC News in Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. And I don't quite understand that. Like, why not show up in Miami and say, "Look, I'm here. I'm going to answer your questions." I won't bore people with the details because it was very complicated, but Ronald Reagan did this during the 1980 campaign and showed up for a debate when Jimmy Carter wasn't sitting out because there was a third-party candidate, John Anderson or whatever. But I think Joe Biden does best when he looks like he's the guy who plays by the rules. So because we know Donald Trump isn't going to play by the rules. So, but that having been said, I hope they keep bickering, and I kind of hope we're spared this ordeal for between now and November 3rd.
Well, I have some closing remarks, but is there anything you want to say before we let you go back to your Friday afternoon?
Yeah, right. Normally my day off, but that's some inside baseball, right? So, no, I just, I do one thing, which is, as of right now, I want to say tentatively, but it's probably more than tentatively, and we're planning to do this again in 3 weeks. So, I just want people, and I know you're probably going to say the same thing, but I want people to stay tuned. So, please please, if you want to keep the conversation going, follow me on Twitter at Will_Bunch. Really, the other good way to find out what's going on is just please subscribe to my newsletter at inquirer.com/bunch. And it comes every Tuesday. And if you want to go to future events like this, including one that I think we're going to be having 3 weeks from today, sign up and I'll keep you posted. And it was great seeing all of you.
Great. Thanks so much, Will.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yeah. So thanks to all of you for spending your Friday morning with us. As Will said, stay tuned to your inboxes for more information about future Inquirer Live events with Will and other members of our opinion team. If you want more Will Bunch commentary in your life, and who doesn't, you can sign up for his weekly newsletter at inquirer.com/bunch. And the last thing I'll say is, if you haven't made your plan to vote in the 2020 election, please visit inquirer.com/how-to-vote. There's so much good information there about mail-in ballots, voting in person, drop boxes. It's in 5 different languages. The upcoming election is the most important one of our lives, so please make a plan to cast your ballot. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your enemies, tell everybody we have to vote this year. We'll see you next time on Inquirer Live. Thanks.
Thank you.